RWBY is the protagonist of RWBY. Big shocker, I know. In all seriousness, while the show was made with four main characters in mind, it's undeniable that Ruby Rose was made to be the starring lead. She is the face of the franchise. Hers was the first trailer we saw back in 2012, and the first episode revolves pretty much exclusively around the Little Red Reaper. In spite of that, Ruby's actual relevance and focus throughout the show has been not the best. Despite being the supposed focal point of the series, Rooster Teeth never really gave her that much attention in the grand scheme of things. Ruby, like many characters, often feels like she's really just along for the ride, getting pulled around wherever this big battle between ancient immortals and gods happens to take her. When looking at the series as a whole, she doesn't get that much in the way in development, nor does Ruby even really contribute all that much. Of course, you can make the argument that each of the main four heroines, with the debatable exception of Weiss, kind of gets screwed over in that regard. At the very least, though, Blake and Yang only really fell off later on. Ruby, however, never really felt like she had all that much going for her in the first place. Many have likened her to a typical shonen anime protagonist, good-natured, optimistic, idealistic, and all around not that complex. Her main goal at the start of the show is that she wants to be a huntress, a warrior who fights and defeats evil while protecting the innocent. In other words, Ruby's driving motivation is simply to become a hero. A fairly common motivation for plenty of anime protagonists. Now, this isn't to say that Ruby's motivation is bad, mind you. In fact, it actually works quite well as a premise. RWBY the show is supposed to draw a lot of inspiration from fairy tales. So RWBY the character, boy that can get confusing, is inspired by fairy tales in her own world. Stories about champions of justice who accomplish great deeds and vanquish mighty foes. Indeed, RWBY at the start of the series is still very much a child, a wide-eyed, somewhat naive young girl who has yet to realize that reality doesn't always have a happy ending like it does in her stories. Of course, to say she's completely ignorant of this fact would be a lie, but we'll come back to that in a bit. One can make the argument that RWBY's arc in the first 3 volumes is losing that naivete, growing up and seeing that not all stories have happy endings. I mean, the opening to Volume 2 is literally all about leaving childhood innocence behind. Plus, the fall of Beacon was a wake-up call if I've ever seen one. After the events of Volume 3, RWBY was clearly set up to have to cope with the reality that being a huntress is far more dangerous than she imagined. The good guys don't always win, and the bad guys pose a much greater threat than anyone was prepared to face. In spite of that, RWBY sets out with the remnants of Team Juniper in Volume 4 to track down Cinder, allegedly, despite still not knowing the full extent of the threat they're facing. From Volume 4 onwards, it can be said, and frequently has, that Ruby Rose really falls to the wayside as a character. It often feels like the writers had no idea what to actually do with her, or to have her personal story develop. She is, supposedly, the leader of the group that picks everyone up at their lowest moments, but not really. Not only does she frequently make bad judgment calls, RWBY doesn't really feel like she has much agency of her own. We all know about the infamous arc she goes through in Volume 5, in which people say she relies too much on her weapon and needs to learn to fight in hand-to-hand combat. This is stupid for a myriad of reasons, not the least of which being that there are plenty of other heroes who have never been shown to fight hand-to-hand and are never taught to do so. It really just culminates in her learning to headbutt Mercury once in Volume 5's final battle, which was a mess unto itself. Needless to say, this really was just a desperate attempt to give RWBY any sort of potential arc, as a result of them, once again, not having any other ideas on what to do with her. But yeah, the closest thing RWBY gets to a proper arc after the fall of Beacon is all the way in Volume 9. Where she starts having an existential crisis about not being good enough and almost literally throws her identity away to become more like her mother. Oh yeah, and now seems as like a good a time as any to discuss that whole situation. Summer Rose is a critically important character in not just the overall story, but also Ruby's arc specifically. A huntress herself, Summer was Ruby's childhood inspiration, a living fairy tale hero who fought the creatures of Grimm to keep humanity safe. She's the one who told Ruby those stories every night, setting her daughter down the path to follow in her footsteps. But eventually, Summer died in the line of duty. She went out on a mission and never returned. Ruby's family never even got to give her a proper burial since they never found the body. The best they could do was giving Summer her own memorial on a cliffside near their home. The demise of Summer Rose is implied to be a very crucial factor in Ruby's backstory, and yet it's seldom ever treated as such until Volume 9. I mean, Ruby's theme song, Red Like Roses, is all about how her mother's death affects her. Well, okay, part 1 of the song is actually about all 4 girls in the intro, and then it's like purely instrumental after that. But part 2 is a song all about Ruby's inner turmoil. How she misses her mom, how her worldview was shattered by Summer's tragic end, and how the trauma clings to her even years after the fact. I mean, the title of the song is an allusion to Summer's spilled blood. Part 2 of the song literally spells that metaphor out for us. Red like roses fills my dreams. The sight of my mother's blood haunts my nightmares. Ruby Rose is a girl who, on the surface, seems full of optimism and ideals. She believes in the nobility of being a huntsman or huntress, fighting back against the evils of the world even at the risk of one's own life. And yet, her mother took that risk, leaving her daughter behind for a battle she would never return from. Even in spite of that, Ruby still wants to become a hero. There was so much room to hint at deeper psychological issues happening in Ruby's mind. But the show never does, and for as crucial as Summer's death is to the main character, neither Ruby nor the audience know much about it. I mean, for one thing, Ruby never saw her mother die. She never even learned the details about Summer's final mission aside from it being a vaguely defined assignment for Ozpin. That turned out to be a lie. And as of Volume 9, we still don't really know anything about Summer's fate beyond the fact that she went on some kind of secret mission with Raven that apparently involved fighting Salem directly, I guess. I suppose it's possible that they wanted to sow the seeds for some big dramatic reveal of Summer still being alive. But seriously, the fact that we're 9 volumes in and we still don't know anything substantial other than the fact that Summer allegedly died off screen is frankly ridiculous. I mean, do we even know for sure who delivered the news of Summer's death? Was it Raven? Did she just show up to Ty's door to tell him, hey, your second wife died. No, I don't have a body to show you, and I can't divulge the details of how or why, but trust me, she's dead. I mean, do feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't recall such info ever being shared in the show, and my research on the matter has yielded no results. At the very least, since we know it wasn't an assignment from Ozpin, he probably did not have the details about her death either. Guide My Way, otherwise referred to as Red Like Roses Part 3, is supposedly meant to be Ruby overcoming her grief at last. She decides to stop trying to follow in Summer's footsteps and instead seeks to surpass her mother, regardless of who Summer Rose actually may have been. Again, they try to treat this vision of Summer leaving with Raven as some big betrayal, like, oh, Ruby's mom isn't who we thought she was. But that feels like a rather bold claim when neither we nor Ruby really know the full context of what was happening. If anything, it doesn't seem like anything has actually changed. Summer went on a mission to fight the forces of evil but never came back. The only thing that has changed is the context, and even then, only slightly. Like, I honestly think Ruby's character would have benefited immensely from just incorporating the lyrics of the song into her story. There's 2 ways you can go about this, I think. Option 1. Ruby actually did witness her mother's demise. Perhaps you could say that she and Summer were taking a stroll in the woods when they were attacked by a massive wolf-like Grimm, something on par with monsters like the Nuckelavee or the Wyvern. Summer tried to fight the beast off to give Ruby a chance to escape, only to be horrifically killed in the process. The last thing Ruby ever saw of her mother was Summer's broken, bloodied body snatched up in the fangs of the big bad wolf, a sight that scarred her for life. Of course, there's the question of how or why Ruby would still want to be a huntress after that, and I think the answer is simple: denial. Perhaps the sight of Summer dying was so traumatic that Ruby disassociates and blocks out the memory. In her mind, Summer is simply missing, though Ruby still sees glimpses of that fateful encounter in her restless dreams. Some nights she wakes up in a cold sweat, though she can never quite figure out why. Option 2. Summer Rose is actually missing and Ruby wants to find her. Maybe we can say that Summer was actually sent on a dangerous mission to the Forbidden Continent where Salem resides. But contact with her and any other huntsmen or huntresses sent on that mission was lost. Everyone presumes Summer to be KIA, but Ruby holds out hope that her mom is still out there somewhere and is trained to become a huntress so that she may one day venture out to the Forbidden Continent and search for her. In this case, the nightmares Ruby suffers would simply be the results of her doubts and paranoia. Everyone around Ruby, including her own family, is convinced that Summer is gone. Despite her best efforts to ignore them, Ruby can't help dreading the possibility that they may be right. In her dreams, Ruby envisions all the horrid ways Summer might have perished, torn apart by the creatures of Grimm or left to wither and die in a hostile environment where none dare to tread. Either way could work, I think. Whichever option you prefer, I stand by the fact that making Summer's supposed demise a more central part of Ruby's personality would have done wonders for her story as a whole. Volume 9 attempted to do something with that, but it really just amounted to Ruby discovering that her mother wasn't quite a perfect hero like she thought, because Summer lied like one time and we still don't know what she and Raven were actually doing that night, so it doesn't feel as impactful as it could have been. But what do you all think? Do you believe Ruby's trauma should be more evident in her character, or would you have gone a different route? Furthermore, what do you think actually happened to Summer Rose, and will she actually make an appearance in later volumes? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.